On April 16, 1945, 2,650 ISU-152 heavy assault guns spearheaded the final Soviet assault on Berlin, their 152mm gun howitzers systematically demolishing the fortified positions where Hitler's last Tiger tanks made their stand during the city's final 12 days. The weapon, nicknamed Zveroboy, Beast Killer, had emerged from the catastrophic loss of 20,000 Soviet armored vehicles in Barbarossa's opening 6 months, when existing anti-tank guns proved helplessly inadequate against German heavy armor, and crews died in fuel fire traps at horrific rates. The ISU-152 represented the Red Army's solution to a penetration gap that conventional weapons could not close, a 49-kilogram high-explosive shell that could collapse reinforced buildings with single rounds, or deliver enough kinetic energy to shred Tiger crews through spalling without achieving direct armor penetration. The primary Soviet anti-tank weapon in 1941, the 45mm model 1937 gun, faced a fundamental ballistic inadequacy against German armor. Its armor-piercing shells could penetrate 60mm of rolled homogeneous armor at 100 meters, sufficient against early Panzer III variants with 30mm frontal plates, but ineffective against the up-armored Panzer III Ausf H, entering service in late 1941 with 50mm frontal protection. At Kursk in July 1943, Soviet 76mm guns struggled against Tiger frontal armor, achieving limited penetrations despite numerous rounds fired. The mechanical arithmetic was devastating. Soviet gunners found their standard weapons transformed overnight from tank killers to liabilities, capable only of flanking shots against the most numerous German medium tanks. The crisis deepened during Mius River fighting in February 1943, where Soviet heavy tank units suffered severe losses to Tiger 188mm fire. Tigers achieved multiple kills per engagement, with KV-1 crews suffering heavy casualties in vehicles lost to fire. The T-34-85 medium tanks with 85mm guns struggled against Tiger frontal armor during the Vistula-Oder offensive on January 15, 1945, achieving limited frontal penetrations at 500 meters despite firing numerous rounds. The Red Army faced a penetration gap that conventional divisional weapons could not close. The rushed Su-152 heavy assault gun, deployed on the obsolete KV-1S chassis in April 1943, provided temporary relief but suffered catastrophic vulnerabilities that killed crews faster than Tigers. During the Battle of Kursk in July 1943, multiple Su-152s from heavy self-propelled artillery regiments were lost in single engagements around Prokhorovka, with many attributed to rear penetrations causing immediate fuel tank detonations. The 400-liter fuel tank positioned directly in the fighting compartment ignited from sparks after rear armor penetration by 75mm PaK-40 rounds, or Panzer IV 75mm shells. Crew survival rates for Su-152s lost to fire were extremely low, with few survivors from destroyed vehicles during the Prokhorovka fighting. Soviet officers described vehicles exploding after single rear hits by Tiger I tanks, killing crew members instantly. Post-battle inspection revealed the 45mm rear armor plate breached, with fuel vapors igniting from sparks generated by spalling. Soviet heavy tank crews in the same units achieved comparable survival rates, highlighting the Su-152's lethal design flaw. The weapon that was supposed to kill Tigers was killing Soviet crews at alarming rates. If you're interested in how wars are actually decided by logistics, math, weapons, and doctrine, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Let's continue. Iosif Yakovlevich Kotin, chief designer of heavy tanks at the Chelyabinsk-Kirov plant, received the design brief to solve the fuel fire crisis in late 1943. In December 1943, Kotin submitted the initial ISU-152 design proposal, factory designation Object 241, titled Technical project for 152mm self-propelled gun on IS chassis. The proposal addressed Su-152 flaws identified in Kursk after action reports. Relocate fuel tanks to eliminate fire risk, lower silhouette for urban combat, and integrate the proven ML-20S gun howitzer onto the new IS-1 heavy tank chassis. People's Commissar of Tank Industry, Vasily Alexeyevich Malishev, issued formal production orders in December 1943, commissioning serial production of the ISU-152. The order specified use of the IS-1 heavy tank chassis with critical constraints. Maximum combat weight not exceeding 46.5 metric tons to match rail transport limits. Armor thickness limited to 90mm frontal plate at 60° slope to avoid exceeding chassis suspension capacity. And integration of the existing ML-20S 152.4mm gun howitzer without modifications to its 4.72-meter barrel length or 1050mm recoil travel. The main Directorate of Armored Forces Technical Department evaluated competing proposals in January 1944. The Su-152M upgrade retained the KV-1S chassis with incremental improvements, relocating the 400-litre fuel tank from fighting compartment to engine bay, adding a 160mm mantlet shield, and up-armoring the roof to 30mm. This variant projected 45.5 metric tons combat weight and 2,500 units by mid-1944, using existing KV-1S hull stocks. The ISU-152 proposal required a complete redesign on the IS-1 chassis, incorporating lower hull profile at 2.4 meters height, frontal armor increased to 90 to 120 millimeters, sloped at 60 degrees, and fuel tanks fully isolated in sponson bays. The evaluation process in January 1944 reviewed prototypes. The Su-152M suffered stability issues on steep slopes due to high center of gravity, while the ISU-152 demonstrated superior armor protection and fired 10 rounds in 8 minutes without mantlet failure. Factory reports from Chelyabinsk provided the decision rationale. The Su-152M perpetuated KV-1S undercarriage vulnerabilities, while the ISU-152, aligned with IS-2 serial production, shared 80% components and closed the gap against projected Tiger II armor via 48.78 kg high-explosive overmatch. The ISU-152's ML-20S 152.4mm gun howitzer fired the OF-530 high-explosive cartridge with devastating effect. The complete cartridge measured approximately 900 mm in length, with a brass case containing substantial diglycol nitrocellulose propellant. The projectile itself weighed approximately 48.78 kilograms, achieving 600 meters per second muzzle velocity from the 4,720mm barrel. Construction featured a forged steel body with ogival nose filled with substantial TNT explosive, topped by an RDX booster pellet. The armor-piercing BR-540 round weighed approximately 49 kilograms with no explosive filler, achieving 600 meters per second muzzle velocity from the ISU mount. Penetration data showed approximately 130 mm rolled homogeneous armor penetration at 100 meters, 110 mm at 500 meters, sufficient to defeat Tiger I frontal armor with marginal overmatch. The blunt-nosed projectile delivered 6.2 megajoules of kinetic energy at muzzle, exceeding spalling threshold on 150mm plate at 100 meters through internal ricochet that shredded crews. The complete ISU-152 weighed 46.5 metric tons, fully loaded with 20 rounds of main gun ammunition and 600 liters of diesel fuel. Overall dimensions measured approximately 9.2 meters length with gun forward, 3.3 meters width, and 2.5 meters height, achieving lower silhouette than the Su-152's 2.95 meters through IS chassis redesign. The 5-man crew consisted of commander, gunner, loader, driver, and radio operator. Though operational doctrine expanded to 6 personnel with a dedicated breach assistant during sustained urban combat per April 1945 amendments. Rate of fire reached 2 to 3 rounds per minute sustained, limited by the vertical sliding wedge breach mechanism requiring hand ramming of 48.9 kilogram shells. Each projectile required 2-man lift from hull sponson storage with semi-automatic loader assist and mandatory 5-minute ventilation cooldown after firing more than 3 rounds per minute to prevent powder fouling and crew carbon monoxide poisoning. The weapon reduced fortified buildings to rubble with single high-explosive rounds, while armor-piercing variants could defeat any German tank at combat range. The ISU 152 entered its crucial test during the Berlin Strategic Offensive Operation in April 1945. Guards' heavy self-propelled artillery regiments received ISU 152s for urban combat operations with the 8th Guards Army and 5th Shock Army. Units received vehicles in April at staging areas, with ammunition loadout of high explosive and armor-piercing rounds per vehicle. Soviet front orders established ISU 152 urban combat doctrine. The orders specified deployment in pairs with 40 to 60-man infantry assault groups, positioning the vehicles 150 to 200 meters from target buildings. Tactical sequence proceeded with infantry establishing base of fire at 100 meters, followed by ISU 152 advance to covered firing positions behind rubble or damaged vehicles. Single 48-kilogram high-explosive rounds detonated against building facades or penetrated through windows, producing 30-meter blast radius that destroyed interior structure and forced German defender evacuation. Where do you find yourself watching from today? If you've got a family connection to this era or remember hearing stories about the heavy guns that ended the war in Europe, drop a comment and let us know what part of this history hits closest to home. ISU 152s engaged German defensive positions throughout Berlin's final battles. Soviet heavy self-propelled artillery regiments encountered German defensive positions centered on fortified buildings throughout the city. Tiger II tanks from heavy panzer battalions positioned in hull-down positions covered main approaches with their 88mm guns. During typical engagements, ISU 152s fired high-explosive rounds at building ground floors, penetrating through reinforced windows and detonating inside. The blast effects collapsed upper floors and killed German defenders, forcing evacuation. However, Tiger IIs opened fire, striking ISU 152s with 88mm rounds that penetrated side armor and detonated ammunition, destroying vehicles and killing crews. German gunners achieved flank shots by maneuvering to expose Soviet vehicles' thinner side armor. ISU 152s maneuvered to engage Tiger IIs and fired high-explosive rounds at German tanks' positions. The rounds struck nearby structures, creating devastating blast effects that forced crews to abandon vehicles. Additional ISU 152s fired high-explosive rounds at defensive positions, destroying strongpoints and forcing crews to abandon vehicles. The engagements lasted hours, with Soviet forces capturing strongpoints throughout the city. German responses to the ISU 152 threat revealed the weapon's strategic impact beyond direct combat effectiveness. German units reports identified the ISU 152 as a significant threat during Berlin's defense. The reports described encounters with Soviet heavy self-propelled guns armed with 152mm howitzers, noting their ability to demolish fortified positions and disable Tiger IIs without direct penetration through catastrophic overpressure effects. German countermeasures imposed massive tactical costs. SS units issued tactical bulletins adapting Panzerfaust ambushes specifically to the ISU-152's low silhouette, recommending elevated firing positions to achieve top-down hits on open roof hatches. German forces concentrated existing anti-tank weapons against ISU-152 effects, reducing defensive flexibility in April 1945. The tactical arithmetic exposed the ISU-152's strategic leverage. Germany concentrated critical personnel and equipment to defend against a weapon the Soviets manufactured at substantial cost at Chelyabinsk. Each ISU-152 forced German forces to adapt existing tactics and divert resources from offensive weapons to defensive countermeasures. The 2,650 ISU-152s produced represented a fraction of Soviet steel output, yet forced systematic German adaptation across the entire Eastern Front. ISU-152 production concentrated at Ural mountain factories to leverage evacuated Soviet heavy industry. The Chelyabinsk-Kirov plant handled the majority of output from December 1943 through May 1945, producing approximately 1,300 units out of total production. CHKZ integrated ISU-152 assembly into existing IS-2 heavy tank production lines, sharing hulls, engines and transmission components with final assembly in dedicated halls repurposed from KV-1S lines. Secondary sites, including Uralmash Zavod in Sverdlovsk, produced additional ISU-152s, primarily in 1944, focusing on hull fabrication and gun mounting while sourcing ML-20S gun howitzers from artillery production facilities. Production peaked in early 1945, with multiple ISU-152s delivered monthly from Chelyabinsk. Total production reached approximately 2,650 units by war's end. Per unit manufacturing cost represented a significant premium over the T-34-85's production cost, reflecting the heavy firepower and armor protection. The cost breakdown included hull and armor, the ML-20S gun howitzer, the V2IS power pack, transmission and tracks, optics and electrical systems, and assembly labor totaling thousands of man-hours. The ISU-152's service extended well beyond World War II, remaining with Soviet heavy breakthrough artillery brigades through the early Cold War. Soviet directives ordered withdrawal of ISU-152s from active frontline units by the mid-1950s, citing obsolescence against NATO tanks and the need to reallocate resources to newer systems. The vehicles remained in reserve storage through the 1950s, with ISU-152s maintained for potential deployment during Cold War tensions. Polish heavy self-propelled artillery units operated ISU-152s from 1945 until the late 1950s, participating in internal security operations and Cold War maneuvers. ISU-122 derivatives were produced with the D-25S 122mm gun, achieving higher velocity and penetration, extending the chassis design through December 1945 production. The weapon that emerged from the catastrophic tank losses of 1941 had proven its doctrine through Berlin's final 12 days. Simple enough to manufacture under siege conditions, effective enough to justify frontline distribution, durable enough to outlast the regime that commissioned it. The systematic destruction of German defensive positions that the ISU-152 enabled during Berlin's final assault traced directly back to the penetration gap that had made Barbarossa's opening hemorrhage possible. 20,000 Soviet tanks lost in 6 months had forced the creation of a weapon so fundamental it required no improvement, only replication. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the beast killer that ended Hitler's last stand, hit subscribe for more World War II weapons profiles every week. Thanks for watching.